Welcome back to a series of conferences on contemplative lifestyle. I am Father John Francis Sequeira, a Carmelite priest belonging to Karnataka, Goa province in India. The theme of our conference today is the dark night of the spirit. We have already seen in the previous conference how God purifies our senses and takes us to the stage of the proficient. In this conference, we deal with the stage of the proficient and the intermediary stage between the proficient and the stage of the perfect, that is the dark night of the spirit. Once the dark night of the senses passes, the dawn comes. The contemplative now enters into the state of the proficient. In this new state, writes St. John of the Cross, as one liberated from a cramped prison cell, the soul goes about the things of God with much more freedom and satisfaction of spirit, and with more abundant interior delight. The soul readily finds in its spirit, without the work of meditation, a very serene, loving contemplation and spiritual delight. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 1, Number 1. Moreover, the spiritual communication of God, which have been stopped, now begins to overflow once again on the senses. St. John of the Cross says that these sensory communications are so powerful that the proficients may suffer many infirmities, injuries, and weaknesses of the stomach as a result of the fatigue of spirit. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 1, Number 2. John of the Cross further writes, thus we have raptures and transports and the dislocation of bones, which always occur when the communications are not purely spiritual, as those of the perfect who are already purified in the night of the spirit. For in the perfect, these raptures and bodily torments cease, and they enjoy freedom of spirit without a detriment to or transport of their senses. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 1, Number 2. Here, it is important to note that the sensible delight is not caused by the exterior sensible experience of seeing or hearing, smelling or touching. It is caused by the overflow of a spiritual communication of God. Now the interior senses are also awakened so that one has a new and a rich way of seeing, hearing, touching and smelling. Now the purified senses glorify God, as St. John of the Cross says very poetically. The deep caverns of sense, once obscure and blind, now give forth so rarely, so exquisitely, both warmth and light to their beloved. Living flame of love, Number 3. Now that the sensible purification has taken place, exterior and interior senses unite to give warmth and light to the bridegroom. However, one should remember that it is not true that all would go through the same experience. It is the will of God that manifests the state of each one as he wills. This state can be short or long for several years. Let us go a little deeper into the dark night of the spirit, knowing exactly what would happen there. The night of the senses is preliminarily and is only night in a transferred sense of the word that we have learned. the purgation of the senses, writes St. John of the Cross, is only the gateway, the beginning of the contemplation which leads to purgation of the spirit. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 2, number 1. And it serves more for accommodation of the senses to the spirit than for the union of the spirit with God. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 2, number 1. The difference between the two nights is like the difference between pulling up roots and cutting off a branch. Or, maybe better, rubbing out a fresh stain from a vessel and an old, deeply embedded one. Fresh one is easy, whereas old and deeply embedded, very difficult. Fresh one is easy, and therefore, so too the purification of the senses. Whereas when it comes to the purification of spirit, yes, one goes through real suffering. Indeed, deep purification of the senses is only achieved in the night of the spirit, wherein the sense and spirit are together purified and healed in the preparation of the spiritual marriage. When it comes to the theology of the dark night, St. John of the Cross is very clear. He says, this dark night is an inflow of God into the soul, which purges it of its habitual ignorances and imperfections, both natural and supernatural, and which contemplatives call infused contemplation or mystical theology. Through this contemplation, God teaches the soul secretly and instructs it in perfection of love without its doing anything or understanding how this may happen. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 5, number 1. St. John of the Cross says it is an inflow of God into the soul. That is to say, a direct communication of God at the very core of one's being. Here, the divine meets the human in an unmediated way. There are times, says the author of The Cloud of Unknowing, when God works all by himself. St. Ignatius speaks about the consolation without previous cause. All are speaking of this direct, dynamic action of God, which is called the infused contemplation or the mystical wisdom as opposed to the acquired contemplation. St. John of the Cross speaks of an inflow. If you ask me, I would put it as a welling up of God in the soul. For God, who dwells secretly in the hidden depths of one's being, seems to awaken or rise up. This can happen in a gradual way, or it can be a sudden eruption of the uncreated energies of which the Eastern Christian mystics speak. These uncreated energies, Orthodox theology insists, are nothing other than God himself. What an earth-shaking event is the rising of God in the depth of the human person. Wow, what a bliss. It is in this state, God, who is the inner teacher of the soul, instructs the contemplative in the divine art of love. In contemplation, writes St. John of the Cross, God teaches the soul very quietly and secretly, without its knowing how, without the sound of words, without the help of any bodily or spiritual faculty, in silence and in quietude, in darkness to all sensory and natural things. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 5, number 1. This is the secret or the hidden knowledge which is called mystical theology. This is the knowing by unknowing. But the soul does nothing and cannot understand. What is happening to me is the cry of the mystic in the dark night. She is losing control. She is like the bride lost in darkness. She knows not where she is going. Now a question may arise in our mind. If God is light and love, why then does the mystic speak about darkness and torment? St. John of the Cross answers it beautifully. He says there are two reasons why this divine wisdom is not only night and darkness for the soul, but also affliction and torment. First, because of the height of divine wisdom, which exceeds the capacity of the soul. Second, because of the soul's baseness and impurity. And on this account, it is painful, afflictive, and also dark for the soul. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 5, number 2. The first is the height of divine wisdom, which exceeds the capacity of the soul. God is infinite, the mystery of mysteries, the light of lights. The wisdom of God is far beyond anything that the human beings can imagine or endure. The inflow of this infinite and eternal light can shake the human person to the very roots, even with a certain violence, as St. John of the Cross would put it. Since this divine contemplation, says John, assails him somewhat forcibly in order to subdue and strengthen his soul, he suffers so much in his weakness that he almost dies, particularly at times when the light is more powerful. Both sense and spirit, as though under an immense and dark load, undergo such agony and pain that the soul would consider death a relief. Dark Night, Book 2, Chapter 5, number 2. The second cause of suffering is because of the soul's baseness and impurity. And on this account, it is painful, afflictive, and also dark for the soul. In this divine encounter, the sinful human being meets the all-holy God. For the true light that enlightens everyone, rising up in the depths of the contemplative's being, brings to light the ugly side of the human personality that ordinarily lies hidden. Alas, there is a lot of darkness in the human psyche, remember, as has already been said. There's a lot of unacceptable crud, a lot of ugliness that we refuse to accept, a lot of shadow. We have spoken about the 7 deadly sins rooted in the human psyche as a result of the original sin. These vices can masquerade as virtues and lead one to destruction. What is most painful is that in the collective unconscious of each one, there lies an archetypal of evil and a sense of sin of humanity, the evil that Jesus faced in Gethsemane. This darkness now pours into the conscious mind. St. John of the Cross describes vividly the torment of the soul that sees its own sinfulness. The soul, at the sight of its miseries, feels that it is melting away and being undone by a cruel spiritual death. It feels as if it were swallowed by a beast and being digested in the dark belly. And it suffers an anguish comparable to Jonah's when in the belly of the whale. Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 6, number 1. St. John also writes frighteningly about feeling of the sense of rejection by God in a person. He says, when this contemplation oppresses a man, he feels very vividly the shadow of death, the sighs of death, and the sorrows of hell, all of which reflect the feeling of God's absence, of being chastened and rejected by him, of being unworthy of him. Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 6, number 2. One can recall here what Padre Pio went through in the last days of his life. However, John of the Cross asserts that these sufferings are not caused by the contemplation itself, but by the ugliness and weakness of one's sins and impurities that are brought to light. There is nothing in contemplation or the divine inflow which of itself can give pain. John writes, contemplation rather bestows sweetness and delight. The cause for not experiencing these agreeable effects in the soul's weakness and imperfection at the time is inadequate preparation and the qualities it possesses which are contrary to the light. Because of these, the soul has to suffer when the divine light shines upon it. Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 9, number 11. Thus, it has to be asserted clearly that the great suffering of the dark night is caused by love and love alone. As Jesus came to cast fire upon the earth, so mystical love is a devouring fire that consumes everything that might oppose it. St. John of the Cross, appealing to a metaphor widely used in the mystical tradition, speaks of fire applied to the sodden log. The fire dispels the moisture, gradually turns the wood black, makes it dark and ugly, and even makes it emit a foul odor. But finally, by heating and enkindling it from without, the fire transforms the wood into itself and makes it as beautiful as it is itself. Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 10, number 1. The dark night, then, is a journey of love in which the bride goes forth from all things in liberty of spirit to meet the bridegroom and to be united with him. For love is like a fire, right, St. John of the Cross, which always rises upwards as though longing to be engulfed in its center. John, Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 20, number 6. Once in this darkness, the soul is purified. It experiences God in an unmitigated way. The soul lays hold of the beloved without letting him go, as the bride proclaims, I found him whom my heart and soul loves. I held him and did not let him go. Song of Songs, chapter 3, verse 4. It is here the soul burns gently in God. The Holy Spirit produces the gentle and delightful odor by reason of the soul's union with God. It is in this burning in God, the vision of God and the vision of the eternal life are experienced. The soul becomes like God. We know that we shall be like him. First letter of John, chapter 3, verse 2. This is what mystical theology calls union with God through participation. Dark Night, Book 2, chapter 20, number 5. There are many devout people who ask me, Father, Is it possible for everyone to reach this stage? My simple answer would be, it all depends on your generosity towards God and your capacity to translate your desire into a commitment. From the part of God, He wants everyone to savor the sweetness of His mighty love. He is waiting to take you and me in His embrace and lead you through this great journey of love. Are you ready to walk in this dark night of love? Make your choice today. God bless you.